afternoon to all of you, and welcome to the first online debate of the new academic year, hosted by the Florence School of Regulation. I am Nicola Rossetto, Research Fellow here at the school. I will moderate this interesting debate. As you can see from your screen, we have plenty of guests that gather together. Uh, the goal of the webinar, well, I suppose you know it because you registered. We will present one of the first outputs of a European research project, U2Demo, mapping the regulatory and legal dimension of energy sharing, energy communities, and other models in which active consumers can interact in the European energy system. We will then have a second, and this will be, sorry, the first part of the webinar. We will hear directly from the colleagues that are working in the project. And then we will expand our reach and we will open the space for discussion with representatives from institutions and from stakeholders to know their reaction and to discuss with them about the novelties that European legislation is bringing forward and the new possibilities that it open. A long list of guests, as I said. I will quickly introduce all of them to you. So let's start following the order in which they will speak. We will have Hugo Moraes, Senior Researcher at INESC ID, a non-profit research center in Portugal, and Scientific Coordinator of the U2Demo projects. Then there will be space for three of my colleagues, Lucila de Almeida, who is part-time professor at the FSR and also professor at Nova Lisboa in Portugal. We will have Max Munchmayer, who is a researcher here at the Florence School of Regulation, and the same actually also Alessandra Portari. They are part of the electricity team at the FSR. Then, also working for the project is Eva Wimpers. She's energy and law researcher at TNO, an important research center in the Netherlands. And TNO is also the leader of the first work package of the U2Demo project. They will speak, they will present the project in the first part of the online debate this afternoon. Later, we will expand the panel, as I told you. Some of these people are still joining because they have multiple commitments at the beginning of the year, but we have Chad O'Brien. He is a deputy head of unit at the European Commission, DG Energy. The unit is the one for consumer, local initiatives, and just transition. So perfect man to comment on the first output of the U2Demo project. Then we have Frédéric Michel Feutla from Luxembourg. He is an engineer, an energy and cybersecurity engineer working for the Luxembourg National Regulatory Authority and representing today CER, the Council of European Energy Regulator. We will also have Josh Roberts, Senior Policy Advisor at RESCUP, so a European association, and also a partner of the U2Demo project. And then Laurens Rutten, Senior Policy Officer at BEUC, the European Association representing the interest of consumers, and Dulcis in Fundo, Anna Momotova, who works as a regulatory affairs specialist at EDP, one of the largest utilities in Portugal, and representing today Euroelectric, so the association of the main electricity companies in Europe. You will see a long agenda, so I will invite all the panelists to try to go sharp to the point. Um, for the audience, remember that at the end of the two sessions, there will be ample space for a Q&A. So you can start thinking, and actually you can drop already your questions in the chat. There is a um, Q&A chat box, so you can put there the questions, and we will try to address them at the end. I think I spoke already too much, so I give the floor to Hugo for introducing the project. Please, the screen is yours.
First of all, thank you very much, Nicole, for this introduction and UI for the organization of this first webinar, and also to all the team from UI, from TNO, and all the partners that contributed for this the deliverable 1.1 or regarding this regulatory mapping assessment. But of course, in the end, most of the work has been done by the people that really know about regulation. My mission here is to introduce the U2Demo project. I think it's the easiest part of the presentation. Maybe if you can go to the next slide, next one. Yes, here the main goal of the U2Demo project is provide open source solutions for energy communities. And inside these needs of energy communities, we are addressing two important points. That is this new possibility of doing energy sharing and peer-to-peer trading. By the way, nowadays, the situation and regulation in the different countries is very different. What is the problem of this is that we have a lot of challenge to provide tools if the regulation is very different, because we will develop the tools, we will calibrate the tools considering, for example, the regulation in Portugal or in Spain or in another country. And afterwards, the tools that will be developed, that will be provided in open source, will not be applicable in other countries, mainly because the legislation is different and they can use parts of these tools, but not the entire tool because exactly of these regulatory aspects. By the way, one of the first activities is exactly to do this mapping to understand what are the differences, what we can do, what is this difference between energy sharing and peer-to-peer trading, and where we can do both or only one of these tasks that we can do in the communities. Here we have in this slide a distribution of the partners in the different countries. As you can see, we have demonstrators also in Portugal, Italy, Netherlands, and Belgium. But afterwards, we have partners in Germany, Slovakia, and France that will give us, and Switzerland, sorry, that will give us one interesting overview of what is going on in terms of energy communities around Europe. Another point that is important is that we have different type of entities with different type of expertise, giving a lot of different point of views regarding the research, the regulation, regarding the needs of the communities, the solution providers, etc. That is also very interesting, and they enrich a lot the discussions. If you can go to, this is the composition of the consortium that I already introduced. Maybe the last slide of my presentation. The next one, please. Yes. Starting here of the structure of the project is divided in 4 different phases. Here, this webinar is integrated in this phase 1. And in this phase 1, we want to understand these policies and business. We have this part that we'll present today about policies and regulation, but we have another part that is also to understand what are the business use cases, what are the business models that can enable the energy communities and that can lead to open source solutions that in fact create value for the society. We have a second phase where we'll develop the algorithms and also we'll integrate all of these algorithms in one platform that we call here the U2Demo platform that will be open source or in open access. And we have last phases that will be dedicated to the demonstrators. The four demonstrators are very different because we have someone dedicated more for the grid aspects and others for the social parts and others for the peer-to-peer markets and finally for the services that the system or the community can provide to the system. This means that the use cases will address different topics and different aspects in the evolution of the energy communities. And we have the fourth phase that in fact will do the wrap up of all the activities of the project, including this session that we are having today to provide some assessment of the development of the communities, of the recommendations for the new policies and new regulations that should happen in the end of the project. Again, thank you very much. I hope that I keep my time and I wish that the workshop will be very useful. Thank you.
Brilliant, Ugo. You actually spare 1 minute, so we can be generous with Lucilla and the rest of the team. So actually, the first task 1.1 of the project was led by my colleagues. So you prepare this deliverable. Well, Lucilla, I give the screen to you to introduce it to our audience.
Okay,
Please.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicolo. Thanks so much, FSA, for hosting this webinar. Thank you, Ugo, for our project leader has been with us for 1 year in a project actually that will last for 3 years and a half. So you are ending the first year. We are delivering, we have just submitted 4 deliverables, and what we are presenting this webinar is the first deliverable of the project. The deliverable in which we try to map, and the law and regulation. And I would ask you related to the activities of energy sharing, peer-to-peer trading within the energy communities. So how about if you could pass these slides? Okay, so what we're going to present today is what I would say pieces and bits of the deliverable. The deliverable is a long deliverable, is 150 pages, mapping the legislations not only on EU but for member states is thoroughly about the activities, is a demand work. And what we're presenting today is not necessarily the mapping, but what we're presenting is already the results on a comparison between what we found in the member states. So the first thing we have to do as far as the objective here is to map how EU and therefore how the member states has transposed energy communities and the activities, 2 activities specifically of energy sharing and peer-to-peer trading, how the energy communities could perform, could facilitate, and could operate these activities. The first thing you have to do at the basic level, especially when we are in the interdisciplinary group, is to define the scope, which I will be very quickly in this webinar. If you could pass this slide, Roberta. So here we go. So in a very quickly way of defining. So if the idea is to look at that precisely 2 types of activity in energy communities, you would have like I would say 3 legal tools or legal mechanisms in which we would have to identify. First is on energy sharing. And an important clarification here, even though the energy sharing definition has been introduced in the EU law recently, electricity market reform, it doesn't mean that actually the activity in itself and energy sharing didn't exist in Europe, because for those who are more familiar with the subject, actually the Clean Energy Package has already introduced collective self-consumption through allowing active customers and renewable consumers to jointly acting. And this was at some point on way of energy sharing. What the Electricity Market Directive did, it was to introduce to, I would say, a lex specialis. We're using like a term in a legal term. So more detailed rules about how to operate this energy sharing and peer-to-peer trading. So we have these three scopes. You have energy communities, peer-to-peer trading, energy sharing. So if you could pass the slide. So how we structure in terms of methodology, here we have a comparative law, we have to apply comparative law methodology. And there are some steps to apply comparative law methodology for selection of the jurisdictions, which in this case were exactly the pilot projects. We have 4 pilot projects in this U2Demo. So the member states, the jurisdictions were choosing the ones that we have the pilot projects, Italy, Portugal, Belgium, and Netherlands. Second step, it is to identify relevant legislations and regulation. Okay, not the third one, basically mostly related to this directives and regulation that has been transposed in EU. The third one is building the analytical framework. And building the analytical framework is one that is quite demanding. I will explain a little bit more. I will go in deep. And once you're building the analytical framework, which is to define how you approach the analysis of these activities, you apply textual and systemic interpretation to answer systemically between different member states, very similar questions, legal questions. So if you could pass, I can go in deep and explain what we mean with analytical framework. More what? So in terms of governance analytical framework, we have a couple of publications. I read it, SEX and HEX, like energy communities is not something new in our legal systems. So we would have in terms of governance of energy, which is important to define it. The first layer that we identify, it was at the governance level. In the governance level, you can find mostly in the definitions of the energy communities. But this governance level would be affected for, especially when the transposition, when member states would start to transpose the energy sharing schemes. So the first part of the report, I would say the first level would be the framework, which was to set the legal analysis in terms of governance. Not only the governments, as far as you are looking at how energy communities operated these activities, what are the governance restrictions. So as governance restrictions could be the members, it includes who could be the members of these energy communities, who the members of the energy communities could integrate operated energy sharing, and other elements as the asset, the ownership of the assets that can be shared. And one important thing of the report is you try to streamline precisely what you can find in the middle of these circles, with particular attention to the governance restriction introducing with the demand of electricity market reform to energy sharing when performing for energy communities. So this is the first part of the report. So if you could pass the slides. Okay. So the second part of the report was to focus on the activities in itself. And these activities you have two, energy sharing and peer-to-peer trading. So in terms of energy sharing, and in terms of peer-to-peer trading, and I will leave it to Max at the end of this presentation, going deep. This report is we are very precise with the legal definition of peer-to-peer trading. We don't go deep, we don't expand it, we don't have an interpretation that it goes beyond what peer-to-peer trading has been defined as a sales agreement in the conducted and performed under predetermined conditions. When it comes to energy sharing, it's more complex. And here it was when or reported folks most of its energy, because for energy sharing as an activity, you have to breaking down this activity in phases. We started by inspired by the INTEC report that has been published by the European Commission. We included different phases that are important, like licenses, which would, for the legal analysis, would make it relevant. And for each phases, we defined resource questions. And by looking at these research questions, it enables us to have a systemic analysis, comparative analysis between different member states. So here, this was, I would say, the core of the report. We have a team. I was leading a team, a very good, excellent team of researchers in which we conducted together this analysis. And I would go for the first step, passing the words to Alessandra. Afterwards, we come back to Eva and we explain sharing, and later one to Max. So Alessandra, if you could
Thanks a lot, Lucila. So starting from governance, actually we addressed the governance of energy communities in our chapter 3 of the report. This is about, if you could go on, Roberta, please. Okay, great. In this chapter, basically, we consider the rules shaping energy communities and also defining their internal settings and operation. And these rules, it's important to stress that they are applicable regardless of the activities performed by the communities. As Lucila mentioned, we identified 11 variables with our methodology, through which we mapped all the applicable legislation and regulations to a double level. I will provide now a few examples of the most relevant aspects that emerged from a first attempt of a comparative law analysis. And I will, as you can see from my slides, and I will try to both highlight the main differences between the member states analyzed, as well as I will highlight the main novelties brought by the electricity market reform of 2024. Please, next slide. So, one of the most relevant variables are the ones related to eligibility and control. Here, basically, we consider the type of persons, of legal entities that can become members of an energy community, considering any type of constraints, as well as the way these members can exercise control powers. And we immediately could identify a first difference between the previous regime under the Renewable Energy Directive and Electricity Market Directive and the novelties brought by the reform of the 2024. Indeed, we see that if we compare the eligibility requirements under the two directives and we compare them with the ones characterizing these new energy sharing schemes, let's call them like that, we see that energy sharing members, they basically coincide with the ones of a renewable energy community, but still there is room for member states to go behind the small and medium enterprises threshold, as long as, and this is important, as long as some capacity and geographical constraints they are respected. In this regard, we notice, for instance, that in Portugal, Portuguese law does not restrict the eligibility to become members of renewable energy communities only to natural persons, small and medium enterprises, or local authorities, as European law does. On the other hand, it is open for anyone for eligibility and control. And so basically Portuguese lawmaker opted to leave this topic to be governed by the general law applicable to the legal entities, depending, of course, on the chosen legal form. Next slide, please. Here another variable that we consider was the one about asset ownership, and here we considered both the asset ownership of the energy community as a legal entity as a whole, and the ones related to the community members. And we realized that in the Renewable Energy Directive and the Electricity Market Directive, there are no strict requirements regarding ownership, renting, or leasing of assets. However, both directives, they provide, for instance, that an energy community can't actually purchase electricity through a power purchase agreement and then redistribute it to the community members as energy sharing. On the other hand, an energy supply agreement would be needed. And in the new directive, the 2024 directive, so the reform, we see that the new ownership regime clarifies some of these aspects that will be applicable under the new regime. Which are in particular, first of all, the facility shall be owned, rented, or leased in whole or in part by the sharing members. And as then further clarified by the recital, a legal entity that incorporates the criteria of an energy community can share with its members electricity that is generated from the facilities that they have in this time in full ownership. So full ownership is required by the new directive here. And the ownership, we analyzed the ownership regime and we found quite a homogeneous implementation of the two directives. And yes, in this way, although with some smaller differences, so for instance, in Italy, it's required that the facilities shall be under the availability and control of the two communities. And the same goes for Belgium when the legislation refers to property or user rights. If you go next, please. I would say that a quite interesting aspect that deserves attention, considering the transition from the current model to the new regime of the 2024 directive, is one referring to representation. Here, actually, we tried to investigate the administrative duties and activities that an energy community can delegate to a third party, and in general, the characteristics, the features that this representative can endorse. And we realized that neither the Renewable Energy Directive nor the Electricity Market Directive, they include specific provisions regarding these representative roles that can be performed by one of the members of an energy community or a third party. However, of course, this does not preclude energy communities to appoint a community manager, a community representative, given that, of course, any legal entity shall be represented. At the member state level, we assessed a certain level of divergences because national lawmakers have listed in a quite with a quite different level of detail the features, the roles and responsibilities of these representatives. For instance, in Italy, we have this soggetto referente that shall be designated for accessing grants and incentives provided by the GSE. And in Portugal, for instance, we have quite a detailed list of tasks that shall be performed by the community manager. And these aspects are relevant, especially if we consider what will be the new regime applicable under the 2024 directive, which is characterized by a new role, which is the one of the energy sharing organizer that can be specifically appointed by the members to facilitate the activity of energy sharing. And here, indeed, under the Article 15A of the directive provides quite a long and detailed list of activities that can be performed. So it will be interesting to see how the member states will implement this provision, considering the existing framework. Next slide, please. And now, with this table, I was trying to show that at the EU level, as far as what we have mapped so far, we can see that energy communities can undertake a pretty broad range of activities that generate these environmental, economic, or social benefits to the members and shareholders. And energy sharing is, as Lucila mentioned, is one of these activities that was already existing before the reform. So if we look at the activities that now are referred to these new energy sharing schemes under Article 15A, we see that by definition, these activities consist of renewable energy generation or storage on-site of a facility that can be owned, leased, and rent in whole or part by active customers. So we have seen that there is already a certain degree of complexity at the member state level for what concerns the governance of energy communities, both renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities. So when member states will implement the new energy sharing schemes under the Article 15A of the new directive, they certainly will have to consider that this scheme has its own new governance features. So this might create a new level of complexity at the national level when it comes, for instance, to eligibility, control, representation, as we have seen before. And before closing here, I would like also to highlight some other things in this slide. For instance, in Portugal, we noticed that energy efficiency services are an activity that is exclusively conducted by citizen energy communities, while EU law enables both types of communities to carry out these energy services. In Belgium and Netherlands, differently from Italy and Portugal, legislation does not provide for the right for citizen energy communities to manage distribution networks, which is instead recognized and required by European law. And additionally, we have argued also in the report that energy communities, they are entitled to perform flexibility services, both implicit and explicit, although a proper definition referred to energy communities is missing in the two directives. And finally, you will probably notice that P2P trading as an activity is missing here, but this is simply because my colleague Max will address it at the end of the presentation. And now we'll go back to Lucila.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. So let's now move to sharing. So as I mentioned to you, the presentation is divided on first look at the governance as far as it has considerable divisions, especially when with the transposition of energy sharing schemes. We speaking here about Article 15A in the Energy Market Directive, in the Energy Market Reform, which amended the Electricity Market Directive. But let's move to energy sharing. Let's back to the methodology. If you could move one slide, Roberta, thanks. So when I mentioned at the beginning, one way of looking at energy sharing and identify of the divergences is that energy sharing, despite being an activity, is an activity that can be divided in phases. Can be divided in phases that goes from, it can be at operational level. For instance, for the engineers, the operational level is the one that would care much, but energy sharing started from its operational level. Actually, it's starting much before. It started on contract. You have like rules in which determine how to contract energy sharing, what needs to be included in this contract. But it can go even before licensing permitting, which is something that is considerably important for the energy transition, in which there is a strong statements that actually many of the energy transition has been blocked but because of licensing permit. What we are going to present it now to you, we will focus on the from contract on licensing and permitting. One thing that we observe and can be noted in the report is that especially when it comes to the licenses on generation units, there has been a transposition by of the Renewable Energy Directive, especially to implement the simplification process. So you can see that all member states speed up the process of generation unit. Nevertheless, on the other hand, when we see other types of processes of licenses and permitting on authorizations that are related with the integration of the generation units in collective self-consumption, and then we can see divergences again. For instance, if there is necessary contracting, resisting the contract, how long it needs to resist the contract, or if you needed like a replacement of your smart meters to be directional with smart meters, how long time it would take, the DSO would take to, and these would be divergences. But let's focus on contracting agreement and, as far as was the cut for the presentation. If you could pass the slide, Roberta. So let's look first at contract. So by looking at the contract, what were the key points you were looking? So if for energy sharing, there is needed that members integrated in this energy sharing process would agree about the terms of this energy sharing, what needs to be included in this contract. So the first thing that you notice between the member states is that actually there is a huge divergence about what terms and conditions the law determine must be included in the sharing agreement. So while in Portugal, we would have like a long list of what needs to be included, like who are the members, what is the sharing keys, how the members would change and decided the sharing keys, how members could leave, what are the penalties if one member wants to leave it from the sharing agreements. These are terms and conditions that the Portuguese law mandated would be included in the sharing agreement, while in Italy, you can see that there is not much observations. There are other points of divergence in terms of contract that is important and relevant to mention, especially sharing keys. In the agreement, in the contracting agreement, there is a needing of defining the sharing keys. Before the sharing keys, there are another divergence that was only blocked is in terms of economic benefits. Okay, there is also a divergence, especially looking to Belgium, in which sharing can only be for free. And this is something, of course, that needs to be taken in consideration the process of transposition of electricity market directive, as far as Article 2, the definition would say that consumers would have the right for sharing for free or for a price. And the point of sharing keys is also another element of divergence. Contracting is quite important. And what you notice is a quite variable. You notice countries, member states who established sharing keys should be fixed, something that will be changing with the transposition of electricity market directive, as far the directive established that must be fixed or variable. You saw variables, but variables, how variable and how defining the algorithm of variable. Then you have the varieties, as I mentioned. So you have variables in which determine that the sharing keys could be different according times, morning time, evening time, or you can go for a level of complexity of varieties that would allow you designing sharing keys that would be very close to trading in a platform of trading. Nevertheless, you are determining sharing keys. So there is no definition of price of the asset in itself, but you would have many variables in designing the algorithm. And this is with the case of Portugal, in which actually they have 4 different varieties of sharing keys recognized by law. So if you could pass the slides. So agreements registration. So once you have the agreement of sharing keys, of the sharing agreement, do you need it to register, and who is the institution that needs to take the role. It's an important step, a simple step, it's a procedural step, but also you have divergences here because while in Belgium and Netherlands, you would have DSOs being responsible of registering these contracts. You have Portugal, in which we've included a DSO and governmental body, and a specifically governmental body, what's called DGEG, not the regulatory authority. This is an important reference, while in Italy would have like a GSE, which is a state-owned company, 100% fully controlled by the state, but also not the national regulatory authority be the one receiving, responsible to registering this agreement. Can you pass this slide? So last and not least, at least from my part, before passing the word for Eva, operational level. So many of the things that some people in the research would consider at operational level, including the agreement, because for instance, sharing keys, despite sharing keys is extremely important for the operation of the sharing. These are defined at the agreement level, not at the operational level. And this is important. And it's also important why the DSO is the one who received the information of sharing keys. Because one thing that you notice that is very homogeneous between different member states. So you see convergence about the role of DSO in facilitating these energy sharing. So these DSO in all member states will be responsible for monitoring, collecting, validating the energy sharing data during balance and settlement periods. What we see difference here, it was the different divergence in roles of the supplier vis-a-vis the sharing organizer. So we see differences, how is the second process, which would also be connected on calculating results, positioning the results, and settling the financial effects. So we could see, for instance, that in Portugal, you would have like a clear distinction as far as you have like as Alessandra has mentioned before, the representative manager, representative or sharing organizer, as the Electricity Market Directive just implemented as the term, what you call EGAC, having several obligations, including to receiving the information from DSO and billing. But in cases, without wanted to give spoiling from the next steps. While in some other cases would be the supplier would assume many of the roles of billing and receiving the information and reducing the metering and calculating the reduction of the meter user in collective self-consumption. So this is a key distinction. And here would be you have affected would have a clear affected in the platform. But I will move the word to Eva so she can continue.
Are you there?
To me and Lucilla, I hope you can take over.
Eva, we can listen you. Yes, I hope your internet is on.
Yeah, I have issues with my connection. Do you hear me?
Oh, now perfectly.
Perfect. Let's start. And if it cuts again, I hope you can take over. Can we go to this slide?
I think it happened.
Find the second is registering those results, and then finally the settlement and the financial effects of this energy sharing. I'm gonna be short with the first two ones. So the first one, calculating the results, we see that in most of the countries, the DSO is responsible for calculating those results. Here we see actually that only Italy has this GSE organization that was already mentioned by Lucilla, who's responsible for that. Another thing that we see in the calculation of the energy sharing is that in Portugal, Belgium, and the Netherlands, the sharing also leads to a deduction of the total metered consumption. And that's important to keep in mind. And I will say something more about that in the next phases. We can go to the next slide, please. So registering results. Not so many differences between the countries that we've looked at. Again, here the DSO is responsible in most of the countries for registering the results of the energy sharing, except again from Italy. And therefore, I would like to quickly go to the last of my slides, because there are the more intriguing observations. Can you? Yeah, thank you. So settling and
we are left with a bit of
about,
suspense.
Yeah.
Please, Eva.
yeah.
Could you repeat the settling financial effects? Because we lost you precisely when you said there is
Oh.
more intriguing.
Okay, that's good that you tell me. Please do, because I don't see if I have any disconnection. So here we do actually see a lot of differences between the countries if we look at the settlement and the financial effects of also the energy sharing. And that has to do already with the model that we've been describing, that the
Again, maybe you can cover, I don't know, if you can step in, Lucilla.
Yeah, definitely. Eva, I think you're back.
Am I back again? Oh, this is.
Yes.
No, I think you can go maybe Lucilla, because we are also a bit late.
Yes, exactly. So I mean the important thing, and sorry Eva, it's a pity because Eva did an amazing job on this. Is that the settling financial effects here? Of course, the first thing you have to take into consideration are the deduction in to what extent sharing leads to a deduction of network charges or not. And we can see like no, it's not as also again it's not convergent and in terms of in our countries. You can see that Portugal we do have it a certain level of deduction. And it's an important information about another one that has been mentioned in settling financial effects is about sharing cannot be a price. It's something that I have mentioned already before. And Eva, if she's back, please complement it if I completed what you have been said. To what extent that it can be sharing for a price or not. In Belgium, cannot be for a price. In the electricity market directive, it said that active customers must have the right of sharing for a price or for free. It might be questioned, and I have been asked to what extent that a member state could be transposed and keep actually sharing as active for free. I have the position that it cannot because it restricts the rights of consumers, and this is a limitation of transposition of the member states. So it has to keep actually the sharing being for price and for and for free, the two options in which is for the consumers to choose. I think this would be quite completed in terms of what energy sharing. We don't cover all, we are taking part of it. The report is much more complex. You can see that in the left side of your slides, you can find the questions that has been addressed for each of the phases. But perhaps it's time to move toward the activity of peer-to-peer trading because it deserves some attention, especially the distinction of it from energy sharing and some complexity and conceptual confusion, especially when you are in the interdisciplinary environment. And I move the word to Max.
Thank you very much, Lucila. And I see that we're already over time, so I will be as brief as I can with this part. But as Lucila mentioned, we think it quite important to devote a separate section to the activity of peer-to-peer trading. Roberta, if you could move to the next and only slide that I have on this. And we should clear up that when we spoke in this report, and this is in chapter 5 of the report when it is published, you will find this information. When we speak of the term peer-to-peer, it became clear to us in designing the methodology for this deliverable that we must draw a line between sharing and peer-to-peer. So when we speak of peer-to-peer in this report, we use the definition of peer-to-peer trading as it is contained in the Renewable Energy Directive. This is not to say that this is the only use, the only definition of peer-to-peer that is out there. And in fact, in a lot of literature, you see peer-to-peer also applied to concepts that we in this report would consider sharing. But for the purpose of this deliverable, we stuck to what the Renewable Energy Directive says, and it is quite clear in saying that peer-to-peer trading is, first of all, a sales contract, and it is a contract that has rules for the automated execution of the agreement. So something that would be akin to what would perhaps be called a smart contract. So this just in terms of explaining how we conceptualized peer-to-peer. Our research question here was to look specifically at how has that provision on peer-to-peer trading that's contained in the Renewable Energy Directive been implemented in the 4 member states that we examined, but also how does that peer-to-peer trading concept interact with the governance and the setup of energy communities, which for this project, of course, is quite important given the nature of the pilots. What we found in our comparison and our mapping across member states is that there's quite some heterogeneity among those member states in the realm of peer-to-peer trading. And this is both with regard to the regulatory depth, so to which degree there are specific procedures for peer-to-peer trading specified in regulation, with perhaps Belgium or Flanders particularly providing a very specific protocol according to which peer-to-peer trading must take place. And there was also a difference here as to how peer-to-peer trading is incorporated into the energy community framework. With, for example, again, Flanders treating peer-to-peer trading as quite a distinct activity, but that is regulated in a very similar way to how energy sharing within energy communities is regulated, but is treated as quite a separate activity that can take place between 2 active customers. Whereas in member states such as Portugal, we see that there is, in principle, in the legislation, there is the possibility of energy communities allowing facilitating peer-to-peer trading between their members, but regulation tends to more emphasize peer-to-peer trading as the selling of excess energy by energy communities that is left over after self-consumption. In the Netherlands, then finally, we found that peer-to-peer trading, as type of peer-to-peer trading, is facilitated within energy communities. That doesn't, however, fully is perhaps not fully the definition that is in the Renewable Energy Directive. So we call it a peer-to-peer style trading within these energy communities in the Netherlands. So what we find in the end is that peer-to-peer trading is implemented, the provisions of the Renewable Energy Directive, but is generally treated as an activity which is independent from, but not wholly incompatible, of course, with your energy community membership. And I think on that, I close and I hand it back over to you, Nicolo.
Thank you, Max, and all the people that work for the project and this deliverable. Very rich. I understand that, of course, the audience probably understood quite well that there is a framework at the European level, but member states can take at least on some aspects different routes as far as the transposition and the implementation of such legislation is concerned. Well, let's now turn to our second set of guests, to the round table with the representative from the institutions and the stakeholders association. We hear from them their reactions to this report that will be soon made available on the U2Demo website. And of course, I will ask them also to share with us and with the audience their insights on how this set of rules and legislation is moving and what's their view. And of course, if they want, they can also raise questions about the deliverable and the presentation we have just listened to. I will start with Tag from the European Commission. you basically you're working on this type of issues every day. So please, Doug, we listen to you.
Hi. First of all, to check that all can hear me,
Yeah,
that I'm
perfect.
visible. Okay.
Yes, great.
So first of all, I really want to start off by saying thanks for this opportunity. And actually, I'm stepping in here for Ashil Hanaset, who works with us here in the unit and is our expert, our true expert in everything to do with this nexus of issues. And so he sends his apologies he couldn't join. He kicked it upstairs for me to do instead, and I do it with great pleasure. Now, that's where I have to do my second bit of throat clearing and say I'm really interested in this. I have to be careful because there's a really good analysis in there, and it will link into issues we have to deal with in the next while about transposition and so on and so forth. So I'm going to say I'm on a not held basis for the detailed legal analysis as to whether something works or is in line with the legislation or is not. But I think that's actually completely secondary to the main purpose of this and the main sense of what's happening with this study, which I think is going to be of use, I hope is of use to member states, to regulators, to practitioners, to many people across the union as they look at this and they think about how do they achieve the objectives of the directives in their national legislation. So there's a few points I could make about Anita, but I just want to say that what's something that's very important, I've seen it runs through this whole report, is where there's a clear understanding. I mean, it's inevitable that people get it, they overlap sometimes, but a clear separation between what are the technical aspects of the work, what are the technical back-end requirements for distribution system operators, where you can think of it in a much more engineering perspective, where you're allocating roles and functions, and I'll leave those things outside, but you're attempting here to see what the technological transformation that's happening with a decentralized system, with greater use of AI, with the greater individual or small scale ownership being secondary actually here, deployment of renewables, and how we can take that and apply it using information communications technology, applying ICT to transform our back-end systems so that we change our understanding of how the market framework that sits around the market is. We've got the technical aspects of the market, and we've got the electricity system, and we've got the market aspects. And this is, and I think it's very useful to think about it in the first sense. I mean, we have a series of technical possibilities that have become possible, right? So that comes in many respects, that comes before the legal rights and the rights that are granted to people in the legislation. There's no point in legislation granting people rights if it's in no practical way achievable for them to do it. This comes up in several points here where we say the requirement to have a smart meter sits in, I think, actually, except Italy, sits in all the systems that were put in place for energy sharing and essentially for energy communities as well. That's not written in European legislation. But we know that in order to achieve the kinds of objectives that we want, it's a de facto requirement. If you're going to do energy sharing, you need to have this, right? So I think that's an interesting way of how we look at it and how we look at what's happening and the transformations that are happening to our system and how the regulatory framework is attempting to channel, to keep up with, but also to channel and to direct those in a way that achieves our public policy purposes. And that's why I think what you can see, everything that we're talking about here is an emanation of the wider digitalization of our energy system. I pick on this with the link between peer-to-peer trading, but also the link to energy sharing and a lot of the activities about energy communities that we talked about, and that's different. So are only possible if we digitalize the internal operations of the systems. We talk about DSOs. It could be somebody else, strictly speaking. In Italy, they don't have a DSO responsible for metering. It's another legal entity. So that could be. And that is essentially one of the areas that we can think of as being linked to interoperability, where these systems, kind of interoperability we want to see, we will have to make choices at a European level of how interoperable should these systems be at European level, how interoperable do they need to be, but that has to be based on understanding what's happening. So as we reflect on whether some of these issues like energy sharing, we need to have an implementing act on interoperability, these are the issues we'll be looking at. But I really want to emphasize this importance of looking at the technical possibilities that are there and seeing the change that are happening as being an outgrowth of technical possibilities that underlie that. The second question I want to do, and I think I really follow an awful lot of what you say here about the distinction between energy, peer-to-peer trading, energy sharing, and these distinctions are important. So one of them is here, and it's implicit in what we're talking about, is that energy sharing comes back and it's internal to the technical system. So it's about this metering, it's about what's being done, and it's about eventually what the signals the market, and we talked about this, about the role of suppliers, what is given back from the technical operation of the system back to the market, back to suppliers, to producers. So it's about the services that are operated, whether that's by network operators or by some other body. It's really embedded in that. And then we have a whole area of issues which is around what are the trading relationships, who are the entities that participate in that, and what do we want to do, and what do we want to allow them to do, and how do they trade amongst each other. So what are but these don't sit inside the technical energy system per se. They sit in the energy market, in the arrangements, in the regulatory framework that we put around the market, but they are separate from the role of the DSO, or separate from the role of the of the supplier, even potentially. Now, I think that's useful because it helps us to, when we look at what are the issues. And it's one of the things that I saw coming through this report, was this distinction is there in several places and quite well brought out. That is very useful, I think, also for others who are looking at seeing what is they want to do. I mean, possibly also, and I mentioned at the beginning, I don't want to make anything about is somebody in breach of this technical rules at all. I think it will come out to people saying what's the main way of doing things becomes obvious, and that should be a great help. Now, this also matters because a private entity, so if the DSO or a centralized body is providing the backbone, the market enabling frameworks, just as of metering, which is just the same as providing, from a market perspective, the wires to allow the energy to be shared, to enable to do it. And then an energy community can, on top of that, put their own services, for what are the services that they are offering to their customers. What kind of peer-to-peer trading do they want to offer their members? Or how do they want to market the energy that they have produced in excess, or how they want to do it, whether they want to consume it themselves? I think this is a really important point, but that they sit on that. And the analogy is, I think we have to be careful slightly with it, but if you are trading energy, you can trade it OTC, you can trade it through different things. You can do forward contracts, you can do spot contracts, you can go to the market in Leipzig, you can go other places. And they have a relationship, but it's at a remove. Energy, or community energy, and peer-to-peer trading can have a similar relationship in many ways, and can build a similar relationship to the market and the underlying, let's call it the underlying utility that's provided by the public system. Now, they come back together because the big challenge is trying to help. Why are we doing this? And this comes back to which entities are we allowing to participate in energy sharing? Which entities are we allowing to participate in energy communities? What are we trying to encourage, and what are we trying to enable? And what challenges does that pose for the rest of the system if we are? So what are we forcing DSOs and suppliers to be able to do? And I put the emphasis here on suppliers as well. What we want, and I think this is something you will see when we publish the Citizens Energy Community package. What we really want to do is to ensure that citizens, that consumers benefit from this energy transition. So the framework of why we are doing this is in order to help normal household consumers, citizens, to be able to directly benefit from the energy transition, or at least to reduce the number of steps that it takes to get to them, the benefits. There are still going to be costs. It's not that this does not make energy free. It changes the way we think about the market and the way that citizens participate in the market. And where up until now they've participated, and they've only really been able to participate, I mean, traditionally, essentially just by contracting with a supplier who uses the energy system to sell them energy. Now they are interacting in a different way. But just as when you put a solar panel on your rooftop, you change your relationship with your supplier, and that's something that's becoming more and more obvious. You change the risk profile for your supplier in terms of whether you are likely to put them in total imbalance or out of balance. When you enter into the greater possibilities of self-consumption that energy sharing is, and whichever way tools we put on top of it, you will be changing your relationship with your supplier. And suppliers, and we see this already for self-consumptions, will react to that. They will either want to see you on a dynamic tariff, or they will want to reflect the risk of the expected average price for them of purchasing energy to supply to you. Now, I think there's an element that we say, that's okay, right? That's okay. But there's another element where we are seeing a great risk for suppliers to utilize this to take advantage to I have to be very careful with my words here to make suggesting there's the abuse of a dominant position or anything like that, and that's not what I'm suggesting. But that there's a power imbalance in this, and that the underlying market structures are blocked somehow because of the commercial interests of different players. I personally think I can see a world where suppliers can be an active supporter of this, where they can understand for energy sharing, for elements of energy communities or energy communities turning into suppliers, where they can be part of this relationship and they can use their information to understand it. But there is a risk. And there is a risk that the innovation doesn't happen quickly enough, and it doesn't happen, and that what we see instead is that it is blocked. This is going to be a major challenge, I think, for all member states, not in the technical translation of what we're doing. I think I have full confidence that the DSOs, and particularly the more advanced their IT systems are, the more they have good data hubs and that, will be able to implement all of these frameworks. I don't think it's going to be a problem for the legal transposition of energy communities. I think that we can do. I think we've got a lot of work done. But as we see this, and as we go into that lot of the hard work that's going to be involved in doing that, but the ultimately quite achievable sets of work of transposition and legal understanding, what we really need to do for this to be a success is to look at how it's working in practice and look at how consumers are benefiting in practice from this, and looking at where things go wrong, and we will see examples of things going wrong, looking at how we can ameliorate those, looking at the unintended consequences of what we're seeing, and looking at maybe what are not so much unintended consequences as foreseeable consequences, but now that as they begin to develop, and how do we ameliorate those? I think that's going to be something very important. But, and I say this as a real but, I said at the beginning, this is really the application of digitalization, ICT, potentially even AI, although I don't want to get into buzzwords, into the energy system. What we are really seeing here is the potential for massive innovation and change in the business model for supplying of suppliers, right? That's exciting. That's interesting. It challenges a lot of people, and we are going to have to make sure that we protect everybody through it, but it really does offer an awful lot of potential. And I don't think we can say fully now what business models are going to develop, whether we will see energy communities turning into something more like, let's call it the Sparkassen of the energy system, major players on the thing, whether we're going to see the suppliers coming under immense pressure from people who are applying other forms of understanding what's happening in the wholesale market and actively trading to their end customers and cutting out the current suppliers. I think there's interesting ways it could develop. We have to be ready to ensure that whatever that is, that we have a strong consumer protection. I have spoken too much because I'm so interested in this topic, and because this kicked me off to a lot even more thoughts. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to what everybody else says.
Thank you, Doug. Very, very clear. So for you, the diversity and sometimes divergent paths is a good way to test the options. So when we know more, we can maybe take other decisions. But let's turn to Friedrich Michel and see what regulators think about this dynamic situation where everybody should be always keep an eye on what's going on. Please, Frederick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join this very interesting conference. I can only support to what the Commission just said before. I think this is right now for grid operators, for instance, and also for market participants, energy sharing may sometimes be seen as a hurdle, and they struggle with it sometimes. But it also the potential for innovation should not be underestimated. While today we consider energy sharing as a right, as an individual right. I think we must look beyond our little, let's say, horizon and already plan it to be a commodity in a very short time frame. So I think within the next 5 years, at the latest, within the next 10 years, energy sharing should be as normal as any kind of, let's say, electricity or telecommunications contract. That there are, as presented before, that there are differences between the different countries. Now, in this case here, we only, or you only compared 4 countries, seems to me as normal. Yet the differences should not be too substantial. So this is also something we have to keep an eye on. Overall, we should have a rather comparable set of, let's say, the playground should be very much comparable across the entire territory of the European Union. For me personally, I would be interested in understanding to what extent in the different 4 countries smart meters, the presence of smart meters has been, let's say, a basic requirement, or if there are cases where energy sharing could be also performed without smart meters. This leads us, of course, also to digitalization, and only with smart meters we will be able to really do online sharing. And this is something which is, for instance, from grid perspective, very important. If energy sharing is beneficial for the grid, then it has a totally different dimension. So we really see it also at SEER as two different levels. It has a social component. It allows electricity sharing, allows people without their own roof, for whatever reason, to benefit from electricity being produced in a renewable way locally. And on the other side, electricity sharing could also remove some of the stress on the electricity grid, which is caused by the massive increase of renewable energies that we have realized, or that we have been experiencing for the past couple of years, and that will go on because the PV, let's say, potential has not been exploited to its total extent, and we have other, let's say, grid impacting factors like heat pumps and electric cars, which further represent a load for the grid. So let's say, the electricity sharing it is not the answer to all of the questions that we have, but it can be a very interesting, let's say, instrument to be beneficial for all of us. It can be a win-win for everybody if we manage it correctly. And then last but not least, my question, and I asked this question to Commission a couple of years already, and I do not know if it can be answered today, but I think our ambition should not only be, as I said before, that it will become a commodity within the next, let's say, 5 years or so, but we should also try to achieve a situation where we can do electricity sharing cross borders. So that means that my parents that live, for instance, in Belgium, and I live in Luxembourg, that I can share my electricity produced on my roof with them. And that, of course, represents some major organizational challenges, more organizational than technical challenges, and legal challenges, of course. But I think it would be a very interesting, let's say, way of bringing Europeans a little closer to each other. Thank you.
You're welcome, Friedrich Michael. Thank you very much. Well, you mentioned the issue of consumers, of consumer protection. So let's start to move to the associations that represents people engaging in energy. And let's start first with Josh from ResCoop. What do you think about energy communities involved in energy sharing and P2P? Please, Josh.
Yes, thank you, Nicolo, for the introduction. My name is Josh Roberts. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for ResCoop EU. And I mean, yeah, we are the European Federation of Energy Communities. We were started in 2013 as a group of renewable energy cooperatives, everything from retail suppliers that are fully owned by their own customers to, yeah, community invested projects. And our membership has just continued to grow, and we represent basically the entire chain. We have DSOs who have historically been owned by their own communities, e-mobility cooperatives, you kind of name it. We have at least some member who's trying to tinker with it. So I think, and it's kind of important to start there. I mean, Nicola won't be surprised. We're always starting with the energy community concept first before we go to any sort of activities. I think given the breadth of what consumers are able to do in the energy sector, you can kind of elaborate that to the possibility for organizing it in the consumer-owned way, where you maintain control over that. It ultimately provides a service back to you, the consumer, the member. But that gives you special rights that you wouldn't otherwise have as a traditional customer with, your normal sort of suppliers. So you get to choose and contribute to the decision making about how the prices are made, and that has a number of effects which I won't go into. But I mean, I think when we are looking at energy sharing, we are looking for us actually, it's been quite a ride as well. I think we also have as many questions. We see benefits and opportunities from energy sharing, not just for the energy system, but the energy transition, the transition to a more decentralized and democratic energy system. Um, but that is not necessarily a given. I have always been saying that the energy transition may be decentralized, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will be democratic. And I can explain a little bit what I mean by that. But first, it's, I think, important to understand where does the energy community actually fit within the construct of all of the market actors? I mean, energy communities have existed for a long time. They were only recently recognized, but they've pretty much been on the landscape since electrification or heating came in. And it's taken different forms since then, but now we have this sort of Bill of Rights at the very least in the EU electricity directives. But at first, we have to ask ourselves, why do we actually need those? And largely that is because an energy community is not your traditional market actor. It's not formed by the same people you would normally think of operating an energy company. And it's not there to provide, I mean, it is there to provide the service, but why is it providing the service? It is much more of a fundamentally different reason of engaging in the market. It's not to make a profit, it's to provide social and economic value to the members. Um, and I think that's an important distinction because, we talk about a free market, but we usually sort of conjure up, sort of non-altruistic ideas of why somebody might get into the market to make money and this sort of thing. So this has a lot of knock-on effects for how energy communities are actually able to compete with their more for-profit competitors. And of course, this has, that exists for every activity, but it is also we're starting to see how that's actually impacting the development of energy sharing. And I think this is where comparative studies like your guys are really useful because we are starting to see how different things are regulated, everything from what is the geographical proximity of how your not just your energy community can be organized, but actually organizing the energy sharing activity. I think those are two distinct but yet sort of related things that really deserve some reflection. I think even more importantly is about the roles and responsibilities that existing and new market actors are starting to take. We can start with the DSO, and I can be much less diplomatic than Tag was about the role of traditional suppliers. I think it's a very cloudy conversation about how, at least in Belgium and in Flanders in particular, suppliers are kind of relying on some loosely explained, I will say, to be, gracious to them about how they're actually charging consumers for just being, with their traditional supplier and having engaged in energy sharing. That is a very interesting discussion in itself, but I do believe that it needs further, at the very least, transparency and explanation. Because there is a discrepancy in how suppliers are actually justifying these costs to their consumers. And I do think that they have an incentive to keep that as vague as possible, because the more they have to explain, the less they can probably justify in real life. I think that's just the way it goes. Um, the DSOs are a lot more interesting. They've taken on a more neutral role in trying to facilitate the energy transition. It's a very mixed bag. Some of them are big, some of them are rich, some of them are small, some of them not so, technologically advanced. So there are a lot of growing pains depending on what you're talking about here. Um, but that is also kind of impacted by how the regulatory landscape is constructed. And I think when I just joined, you guys were talking about different DSO roles and settling or calculating the share of energy. And this is also, this has a direct impact with how the suppliers see this. And I do actually think that, TAG also mentioned a implementing act on interoperability. I think these are some areas where we could actually see a lot of benefit from having more clear rules that will lead to innovation that can also help the suppliers who are indeed impacted by this. I'm not going to be totally like pointing in their direction, but I think there are issues that could be fixed there through just simple innovation. One of the more interesting things that we've been looking at is the role of third parties and third party organizers. This was recently defined in the Electricity Directive in Article 15A. And it is not clear how this is going to evolve for energy communities. A lot of them might work with a third party service provider, but we also, kind of going on what Frederick just mentioned, the normalization of energy sharing. We see this also, but we also want to make sure that it develops in the right way so that going back to my original comment about not necessarily having democratization, we don't necessarily want energy sharing to be reliant on the third party organizer. We do want energy communities who want to be self-standing, who want to maintain the benefits of their operations through this activity within the community. We don't want them to be reliant on these sort of third-party organizers just to get involved into the market, because otherwise you're taking away value, you're taking away agency from them. Um, and I think this is also, I mean, energy sharing is a very interesting opportunity, but it's not the only name in town. I think a lot of, especially the more advanced energy communities that have been able to become a fully fledged supplier would tell you that they've been doing energy sharing for 20 years. So they actually fulfilled the whole loop. So I think energy sharing, if we're going to maximize the benefit for consumers, we also need to see this as a stepping stone or a ladder whereby energy communities can professionalize in the market, not just to benefit in a share of what they can produce and consume in real time, but to be able to utilize the market to grow together, create a critical mass whereby they can rely as much as possible on their local production and consumption, using the market when necessary, but not being reliant on it, as we've seen in the wholesale market crisis back a few years ago. So I think I've also probably said too much, so I'll leave it there, just more trying to be thought-provoking. But yeah, thank you for the invitation, and maybe we have some interesting debate later.
Thank you, Josh, and for reminding us the difference between type of organization and a type of activity. Let's now turn to Lawrence, represent consumers, which are a broad category, and maybe not all of them are so keen to get super active as probably most of the members of the of Rescue. But Lawrence, the screen is yours, please.
Thank you, Nicolo. And I also just want to say that I'm observing quite interesting back and forth in the chat about additional sort of food for the conversation. So just to say to the people online, I've been enjoying your conversation in the chat. My name is Laurens indeed, and I work for the European Consumer Organization. We represent national consumer organizations to the EU institutions, and the acronym BEUC stands for our legal name in French. And as I was preparing my speaking points for today, my former manager at Beuk, I used to be in another position, came into our kitchen this morning and asked me about energy communities and energy sharing. And I went into way too much details, I think. And it's made me reflect a bit on what I was going to say this afternoon, which is that I think an excellent legal comparison has been done by the U2Demo project. I've learned a lot. There's still many questions that I have as well. At the same time, we at Beuk always say that the sustainable choice should be the easy choice. And while there are lots of legal distinctions, I think we have to recognize that the end consumer as a wide group does operate in an interdisciplinary environment. And I hope to expand a bit on that in the next couple of minutes. At a maybe more high macro level, Beuk as such has been supportive both of energy communities and energy sharing, regardless of the various forms and combinations it can take. And specifically on energy sharing, the value that we see is we still think there's a gap between people that cannot adopt renewable energy themselves for a variety of reasons, be it economic, being tenants, living as a tenant, what it may be, and that the new European Union legislation, the electricity market reform, but also already systems that existed before it open up possibilities here to have people involved in the energy transition, even if it may not seem so apparent. At the same time, our perception is that energy sharing, and here I'm just not going yet into the specific legal concepts, it can mean different things to different people. And I would like to pick up on what Josh said. I think we have to be realistic and see, we have to look at transposition, implementation, comparative legal approaches, but it's not clear how it is going to evolve. I think I directly quoted you there, Josh. And that's a bit the same perception we have. We see peer-to-peer, we see energy sharing, we see energy sharing in energy communities. They're all different things, but at the end of the day, how easily are these systems understandable for consumers? Can they find information about it? And then when it comes to energy sharing, for example, what is the pre-contractual information like? Will people receive a bill? These are sort of the core questions that will impact consumer uptake. And these are also the aspects that we'll be looking at. Of course, consumer protection is well covered in the legislation, so there's not a legislative question there as such, but there is a practical question how this is going to be done. Is an energy sharing organizer going to be responsible? Like, who is going to have to meet all these obligations in practice? So what I lifted from the U2Demo report while reading it, I think it's very good that you fleshed out a bit the energy sharing organizer role. The comparison of legally enabled activities is super useful. It has saved me a lot of time and headache, so thank you for that. I also take note, which is not so surprising maybe, of the inherent divergences that you speak of when it comes to the implementation of directives. I work for a consumer organization. We work on many more files beyond energy, and we see this everywhere. The directives tend to go a bit in all directions. But for me, the crucial question mark is this distinction between peer-to-peer trading as a sales contract and energy sharing in terms of in how far is this going to matter in terms of how these schemes are promoted to the end consumer? Is it simply something more for regulators and authorities to take into account? Because we know the energy market overall is a complex one for consumers, even when we go more to the traditional elements such as a contract, a fixed contract or a dynamic contract, let alone when we go to newer systems. So what we at Beuk are generally asking for, and we feel also a lot of you are working on this, and we will get there over the next couple of months and years, is more clarity how this all is going to work in practice. And I will give you some examples from what our members have been saying on this topic. So our German member, Verbraucherzentrale Bundesverband, has written to their federal government on with the implementation of the new energy legislation in their country, and they have asked for monitoring on, for instance, when it comes to energy sharing, about the number of energy sharing arrangement that exists, how many houses are joining them, what are the average system sizes, what are even in the grid effects, to go a bit also in discussion of DSOs and others, and any possible problems arising from the removal of supplier obligations for smaller systems. Then our Belgian member took a different approach, and it was reflected a bit in the chat I saw earlier, where our Belgian member looked more at the high administrative fees that have been charged in Flanders, if I'm not mistaken, for energy sharing, which reduces the interest for people to participate in it, which contrasts with, now I don't know the system in Wallonia immediately, so the French-speaking part of Belgium, but I know in Brussels has a different system, and that was promoted as a better solution in terms of not putting all the sort of say pressure on suppliers, but also finding other ways to make the system work. Our Slovak member is looking more at the fact that they see a problem in that in their current legislation, basically the person who shares and the person who gets the electricity have to be with the same supplier. And that needs to be resolved legally in their country. There seems to be a proposal for this, but it hasn't been adopted yet. And then our Spanish member has done a very wide research into collective self-consumption. So including, but again, it can mean different things again. I think going more with the old definition, but it also it gives a very good overview of all the potential challenges to the projects that I think are relevant even when you go to the other definitions that are used in the U2 demo project. So including, how easy it is to get an installation up and running, lack of knowledge among local authorities, how to develop the role of the energy sharing at a national level while taking into account a federal structure of a country, among other things. Then building on what the European Commission said earlier, so how do we move the debate forward? Well, for us, it's indeed also about collecting best, worsts, and everything in between practices and seeing how these legal obligations are turning into reality. And then seeing if down the line it is simply about, indeed, as Steek mentioned, providing remedies, or if there is, I don't know, something missing in the legislation. I cannot say that today. I have to be the person who brings up the concept of one-stop shop. Go to any event, and there's always somebody that mentions the topic one-stop shop. And it's important that these are set up for energy sharing as well. I know some countries have it, which is also a reference in your research. I just think here we need to go broader. It's not just a one-stop shop for end consumer information, but also for all the actors and stakeholders that have to make sure that the system works for the end consumers. Clarity on and monitoring of how the consumer rights and protections element that are in the legislation are going to be met by the different energy sharing systems. As we are finishing our input to the EU Citizens Energy Package, we also think there could be scope, for example, for continuing the excellent work of the Energy Communities Repository that existed in the past and potentially broadening that to other systems. So my question to the researchers that have presented this excellent overview, but also to the audience and anybody else that wishes to comment, the issues or the complexities that we see, do you, as a former manager of mine would call it, consider these lethal issues, or is it a thing of like clarifying it in the form of information requirements to consumers and monitoring? That would be the questions as a non-lawyer. But thank you very much for this research, and I hope my contribution was useful.
Thank you very much, Laurens. I think that your contribution complemented well, Josh, and clarifying this idea of the vision for a democratic energy future where people are empowered, but of course do not have to face a jungle every day. Now let's turn to Anna, because she represents the supply, so an essential actor of the energy system that now has to face new challenges to evolve where new rights and new duties are established. Please, Anna, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Nicolo. Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, it is a privilege to be here, obviously, and to contribute to this discussion that is timely And of course, it's vital for citizens and communities across Europe. So as the final speaker, let me take a bit of step back and frame a bigger picture. So today we heard a lot of different perspectives on how different member states are approaching Article 15A in very different ways. So we have discussed both elements of convergence and divergence, the roles of distributors, third parties, some opportunities. And of course, me working in EDP as a supplier, we also have a different way of seeing all of this. And I think that it will be useful to take a step back first and to see that indeed what we see here is very clear. So consumers and, well, citizens in general want more control and more resilience and more fairness in general in the energy systems. So this directive, and in particular this article, came at the exactly right moment to be much more than another like technical adjustments. It recognizes that these consumers can be more than passive bill payers. They can be active participants, and they can be producers, and they can engage in sharing this clean energy. So as an example, so we heard here different member states on how they implement all of this on the ground. So in Portugal, where I can share with you, indeed here energy sharing is not just a concept. So it's already shaped by rules on taxations and grid charges and digital infrastructures. And Portugal, I think it's a good example that shows both the potential that directive is trying to implement in member states, but also some hurdles that we heard, of course, here in the panel today of this transposition. So I think it shows that it's possible when the legal framework truly empowers citizens. This is the ambition that we need. And I think this is where we're coming from and what we're aiming to achieve. So what I can say is that maybe it's important to underline how complex this transposition is sometimes in some member states. So I think that it's important that, of course, the EU sets the framework, national governments retain, some discretion. And this has already produced some regulatory fragmentation in member states, as we saw in the presentations today. So for instance, take Portugal as an example again. So surplus energy under self-consumption is exempt from excise duties up to 1 megawatt. And of course, the VAT is handled through a reverse charge mechanism where the aggregator, not the citizen, issues the invoice. On this contractual side, communities must draft internal agreements and defining sharing methods and appointing manager, etc. And in Belgium, these rules are a bit different. And in Netherlands, they are also a bit different. So I think that all of these differences that we see today show us how different this legal reality from one country to another, even being in the same, super close to each other. So in the end, I think that beyond the legal texts, this risk sometimes of fragmentation and legal uncertainty, it can create some technical barriers. However, I think, and I believe that this is a bit more important actually in this scenario. This fragmentation is also an opportunity. So we also saw a bit today the panelists discussing that this is also an opportunity for innovation, and I agree, because different member states are experimenting with different governance models, and this allows us to see, okay, some communities can act almost like micro suppliers. Others have a bit stricter limits. But when we compare all these models, we can learn of what works best in practice. We can see which differences we are experiencing, and of course, we can learn from all of these best practices on the ground happening today. So this diversity, I think it's more of an opportunity than a challenge, because it allows us to indeed transform the roadmap for EU policy and for the energy transition in general. And the challenge nowadays is mostly about making sure that these lessons are captured and are shared and are translated into coherent European guidances. And of course, they also drink from this knowledge of European guidances. So this must be a dialogue between it's not only about one dialogue to one way to another. It's a mix, and I think it's working very well. So not to take more time, I think that looking ahead, what is needed now, and I think that report is clear about this as well, is that if energy sharing is to fulfill its promise to deliver what it aims to deliver, we obviously need three things, right? So it's interoperability. So platforms, I think, would benefit to work across borders and not within just one member state or two member states. And we see this a bit reflected on the presentations that we had today. And I think that indeed it's one of the key points of this conclusions. And of course, legal clarity, because when we have legal clarity for consumers and communities in particular, they must know their rights and they must know their obligations, and it has to be clear and it has to be transparent, so they're not facing a patchwork of different conflicting rules. So this regulatory convergence that we see in many EU countries, which is, I think, is very positive, is that the EU and member states are working together to align their frameworks and still allowing some room for local innovation, which I think is also very important. So I think if we are successful, indeed, this Article 15A will not only pave more ground to democratize access to clean energy, but also indeed strengthen Europe's resilience and competitiveness.
Thank you, Anna, for your remarks. Very interesting. If I made these last comments on this, in a sense, what you say is that energy sharing and the similar activities and the activities similar to it can thrive only if we reduce transaction cost. This is a typical concept in institutional economics. Since we are trading small amounts or exchanging small amounts of energy, it should be easy. And then you need interoperable solutions. You need the different legal possibilities, but not too different. Otherwise, complexity and transactions cost escalate, and then we will not see people engaging in these new forms of energy models, energy exchanges. But I'm not an expert, or it's not my role today. Uh, we are a little bit behind schedule, but I want to give an opportunity for the members of the U2Demo projects who reply if they see it proper, if they have something to say to the several provocations from our um, from the panelists of the round table. So very quickly and sharp to the point, I invite the various people, starting with Lucilla, to react to the comments they received. Please, Lucilla.
Thank you so much, Niccolo. First of all, we highly appreciate it for all of your comments. We noticed that you read the report, thorough, word by word. It was a complex mapping. Of refining that mapping to make it readable for the audience. It was not a simple text. So, like, deeply appreciated your comments and your feedbacks about the report, your positive feedbacks, and how to improve it. To make sure that we all address your points, I will take it one point, and then I will lead other colleagues to address the other ones, and the ones that I'm particularly closed and attached to, which is on the consumer benefits that Lawrence has Josh has raised it, Tad has raised it, the elements of the consumer in the energy sharing, how to ensure that indeed the consumers as being the benefit, how our consumer protection rules are being designed to ensure this. And I think this is extremely important questions, because I think there are two elements in energy sharing that we needed to pay attention. One is charges and costs and pricing, and another one is information. So starting from, I will distinguish, but being quickly. So the sharing agreements it's important because it needs to be agreed between member states. In the sharing agreements, you needed to speak about sharing keys. And sharing keys is the word that uses of an algorithm that would be agreed between the consumers about the economic benefits they will receive it, how much they will receive it by sharing. And for consumers, is the first point. What is sharing keys for a reasonable consumer? it's harder to inform them. So first of all, you have to make sure two questions, that the sharing keys and these agreements are informed to consumers. Consumers are aware how they will get the benefits. This needs to be included in the contract in tangible way. And here it's the first challenge, Lawrence, legally challenge, okay? If energy sharing agreements are between consumers, we are not sure if consumer directive, rights directive are applicable. There are questions if it's applicable. When you have an energy community being facilitating energy sharing, and then it's a question as far as you have like a business institution, it might pump out, but it's not I would say it's not a black and white, say yes or no question. It's question to interpretation. So sharing keys is important from it, how to inform them and how to make sure that they will be designed that in a way that consumers will be indeed receive the benefit. The second point is intermediary fees. So in the sharing keys, different than actually traditional supply contracts, you have more intermediaries than actually consumers are used to deal and to trade it, starting from the sharing organizer who can charge its fees. It's starting from the DSO that can charge fees if the charge costs, if they are billing the billing process. So these fees are crucial because to understand it, they cannot extract all benefits of consumers to get into energy sharing. Otherwise, we will remove them from the interest of. So this is an important information, and this is an area in which we don't have regulation. So we don't have regulation on these fees. Third point yet. The citizen energy package maybe is coming, so it's something that we can look at. Billing information, okay? So when you are in the energy sharing collective self-consumption here, the billing information according to the article 18 in the annexes of the directives, it said billing need to be informed transparently to the consumers, but we still have with traditional billing. So we still like consumers when they engage with collective consumption, they know already the number that has been already settled. They don't know how much they produce. They don't know how much the most they share, and they don't just know the final results. So now we have Annex 1. If you go to the wording of the Annex 1, the billing that we have so far, the guidelines are no longer appropriated for energy sharing. You needed to revisit it. The terms are there, the rights are there. We needed guidelines for revisiting these billings. This is not, the report has not the purpose of come out with recommendations, not yet. But this is, I would say, I spoil what is coming on when we started to deal with policy recommendations. And thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucilla. Let's move maybe to Eva. Would you like to comment, please?
Thank you that you're there. I think my internet connection is better now. Do you hear me well? Yeah, perfect. Good. Yeah, I would like to address some of the questions were about interoperability and developing a framework that also can work cross-border. And I think this is one of the main or key objectives also of the U2Demo project. And so we are doing a legal analysis, but at the same time, we're also looking at what kind of business does it generate, or what kind of technical support do we need, what kind of tools do we need. And one of the things actually also the legal analysis helped us to realize is that even though Portugal and Belgium might seem very different, they kind of have the same energy sharing model. And that helps us because we see, for example, I couldn't present that because my connection went off. But one of the things that we noticed, for example, that in Belgium and Portugal, although they are very different, they both do a ex post adjustment. So they do an adjustment on the energy bill after the market already did its thing. And why is that an important insight? Because it tells us something about how the different market parties that are involved in this whole energy sharing scheme are affected, and also what kind of information flows there are necessary between the different market parties that are involved in the energy sharing, or maybe make it possible, this energy sharing. And one of the things that we do in the U2Demo project is also to make those information needs visible so that we can build tooling that can be implemented both in Belgium and in Portugal. And so that's why the legal analysis was a good start to give a more of a feeling for what kind of different models are there and what kind of different actors are involved in the energy sharing in the different countries. So that was one of the things that I wanted to point out. Another thing that I want to point out here is more of a general reflection, and that also started with our first speaker, of course, on the changes in the energy market. We have 4 pilots involved in the U2Demo project. And one of the things that we see is that energy sharing is one of the activities that they want to develop, but it's often in a combination with other types of activities. That can be, for example, that they have a constraint from the network operator that they need to facilitate. And then energy sharing can be an activity to make that possible, to stay in that constraint. So we see that energy sharing is often done together with other activities, and therefore it's very important to have a good understanding of the legal conditions, and we need to also expand it to these other activities. We're looking at the framework of independent aggregation and so on, and so that we can build tooling that can not only facilitate the energy sharing, but also these other activities, or even combine those activities. So I think I keep it there, and that might also that also has an impact, of course, on the business and can improve the business part of energy sharing.
Thank you, Eva. So let's move to another member of the U2Demo projects. I wonder if Ugo, if you want to comment.
Yes, only to complement a little bit in something that was discussed also by the participants about this digitalization and the requirements, for example, about smart meters and so on. I think this is critical for the energy communities, and we have a lot of things to do, or the DSOs and retailers have a lot of things to do. Because, for example, nowadays what we saw is that we do the measurement and the information goes to the DSO. And for example, in some countries, what the DSO do is send one Excel to the community, and the community will do the sharing and send back to the retailers and to the DSO. And this is not possible if you want to enlarge or have more communities, because it's something that is not automatic. And for example, today we exchanged with one energy community in Austria, and the mechanism is the DSO is responsible for do the sharing, saying that they do the sharing in the pro rata of the consumption without any strategy. And for example, if you look in Portugal, in fact, the sharing keys, or the percentage of each sharing is defined by the community. This means that our community manager in this case. This means that we have a lot of work to do in the digitalization of all of this process. I think that the establishment of smart meters is almost mandatory to calculate all of this sharing. And we have another point that Eva mentioned, that is this process are now running in settlement phase after the operation, but maybe some of this process can do also before the operation. They have to have optimal management of the community and not react to what happened in the community. But I think the digitalization is critical for this process.
Definitely agree. And I think, again, is this issue of reducing the cost of managing all the exchanges, and digitalization can do that. Probably, Ugo, in your words, you can also see the possible trade-off between simplified arrangements for the members of the communities, and also the possibility to customize them based on the preferences of the communities themselves. Let's hear from maybe Max wanted to answer to some comments. Please.
Yeah, thanks, Nicolo, and I'll be brief. But wanted first of all to thank also thank all of the panelists for their really valuable input. I think we were deeply appreciative of your input today and for your engagement with the report, which is extremely enriching. I wanted to just briefly address some of the more specific comments that were left by the participants to this webinar, and thank you very much again for this input. Perhaps first I'll come to the specific questions that was raised in the Q&A box, pointing out that fact about energy community verification in Flanders. And I should clarify here that when we were talking about verification checks, we were specifically speaking about the registration of the energy sharing agreement rather than the verification of whether an energy community is set up as energy community. But for the latter, for the activation of energy sharing, looking at the provisions put in place by Fluvius, our understanding is that that is subject to certain ex-ante checks. So thank you for providing the opportunity to provide clarification here. Then also thank you for your input in the chat and pointing out that modality, very interesting modality in Flanders of energy sharing with yourself, which is something that we did observe. But again, the scope of the project was such that we looked at energy sharing within energy communities. So to that degree, this provision was out of scope, but of course, a very valid input. And finally, just to comment also on the fact that we did see precisely that sometimes there is that conceptual fluidity between sharing and peer-to-peer trading. With Freddie also pointing out that Flanders, we also saw that sometimes it's called energy sharing for a price, might be considered peer-to-peer trading. So what we did, what helped us gain clarity of how we wanted to map those provisions, is to stick to the law and particularly to the energy decree in Flanders, which does treat energy sharing and peer-to-peer trading under separate articles, specifying specifically that energy sharing cannot be for a price. Peer-to-peer instead is considered a trading arrangement. But yes, thank you very much once again for that engagement with the report and the presentation.
Thank you, Max. Dulcis in fundo. Alessandra, I wonder if you want us to comment, please.
Yes, quickly, if I may, I would like to complement a bit on the points raised by Lawrence on the role of the energy sharing organizer in this context of a more decentralized system and the roles of consumers. Because maybe I was too quick in defining like the new tasks and roles that can be performed by these organizers, and which includes, according to the directive, providing support for managing and balancing behind the meter loads, but also communicating. Like the organizer has many communication roles with all the other relevant entities, and also last but not least, contracting and billing activities for active customers involved in these new energy sharing schemes. And since the questions was, well, since the provision on energy sharing organizer is so detailed in the new Article 15A, I have the impression that if properly implemented at a member state level, it can really somehow enhance the level of protection for consumer, especially if we consider that the electricity market reform granted explicitly the extension of the consumer protection measures included in Article 10, 12, and 18. So starting from the basic contractual rights, the right to switch and rules on switching related fields, which are super crucial in this context, but also the rules on billing and billing information. So if properly implementing, I have the impression that we can reach a further step. So for what we were able to address within the scope of the U2Demo project, as far as I know, the only the most advanced framework in this regard is probably, well, already Portugal has implemented, has provided several tasks for the community manager in this regard, but also in the Netherlands, according to the proposal for the implementation of the 2024 reform, we already have some provision in this regard. Although there is a debate at the national level on the way to specifically which tasks should be assigned to these new managers. So this is what we found so far.
Thank you, Alessandra. We are close to the end, but Josh asked to comment. Please, if you're able to be sharp. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. I'll probably raise a few more questions too. Just in raising this, I mean, I found it kind of interesting. Just I think we talked a little bit about some of the benefits of what interoperability would be, but we also kind of linked it with this cross-border idea. I just kind of want to challenge that a little bit because I think, and Ava, you kind of mentioned this, like the potential to use energy sharing as kind of a building block for compiling different other activities to actually benefit the energy system. One of the things that we were really interested in making sure happened with energy sharing was that it really presents an opportunity to optimize local production and consumption at the local level. And I think there's a big tension between this idea and actually how it's framed in the electricity directive, because it's really based on bidding zones, which are actually quite large. Now, if you expand this to cross-border energy sharing, I actually question what the benefit of energy sharing really is going to be, other than some sort of offer that you can do to share energy, either between yourself, with your relatives or whatever. And for me, this is almost like layering something on top of the existing market. You will have to transfer these electrons regardless. And I think we could get a little bit lost through the trees. So I think, it could be a novel concept, at least like at the regional level. If you're looking at like the Basque region in France and Spain, something like this, where there's actually a connection there that could be interest. But I think we also need to keep this in mind, and we haven't talked about this at all, which I'm actually surprised, which is how we actually incentivize energy sharing. There are a lot of conflicting interests of selling your production versus optimizing your consumption. Market design will play a lot in that in terms of time of use and incentivizing storage. So these are the kind of questions that this is more like yeah, provoking, but just something, some food for thought that I just wanted to put out there.
Were very fruitful fruits. So, George or two persons would like to react. Please, very short because we are running out of time. Eva.
Just, I did really recognize that discussion, Josh, that you mentioned about how should there be a geographical limitation to energy sharing. When I mentioned it earlier, I was more thinking about that you could develop tools that you could use in different countries to support energy communities by analyzing what are the similarities. Even though we think they're very differently organized, they might have some similarities and can benefit from the same tools. I'm not so much in favor of cross-border sharing immediately. So it was much more on how to use the tools. However, this is a discussion in the Netherlands as well on how to say we now chose the bidding zone, but we say also that if there is congestion issues or if energy sharing could contribute to local constraints, then it makes sense to actually say, okay, let's use that energy sharing activity to support and help these local constraints. So it depends a bit on how your market is, of course. If you have no local constraints, then there's also the question, why limit your energy community? And so this is, the balance that we need to find. And I'm curious to see how this will develop in the future.
Maybe Frederick and Pag, very quickly, just
Josh,
a couple of sentences, please.
Sorry, Josh, the thing is, grid beneficial, let's say, actions happen locally. So sharing locally, this can be beneficial for the grid. If you share electricity across Europe, then of course you need the grid, and then you also have to pay the corresponding grid fee. My reflections earlier on sharing across borders is more inspired by the social component in electricity sharing. So let's say unifying Europe also by the fact that I can, let's say, live elsewhere in Europe and still make my family or my friends benefit from my own produced electricity. But in that case, of course, I strongly rely on electricity grids in plural, and of course, then I also have to pay the corresponding grid fee. However, if I go very local, then it can be helpful also for the grid, and in that case, also the grid costs may reflect that eventual, let's say, benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. Michael? Hage?
Yeah, I picked up on this and I wasn't going to come back in. Several people have mentioned the cross-border element, and of course, that's like catnip to the European Commission. I want to come back. First of all, I want to second Eva's distinction between the different elements of cross-border or harmonization, or what would you be talking about? I didn't hint, I said, one of the things we'll have to consider is this one of the areas where you need to have more interoperability. And picking up on points that you made as well, Nicola, it was a very important point. You said, well, look at actually, this is where by standardization, by making things easier, you can massively increase the decrease the per unit cost, increase the benefits for everybody. So here the question we have, and I even noted down, is which are the areas that we must harmonize at European level to achieve that? Which ones still need to be left to local decisions, local regulatory decisions, and which ones are actually outside the scope of the regulatory framework? And it is by creating a harmonized regulatory framework that we have created a wide internal market that allows somebody to, for example, create the back end for somebody providing either peer-to-peer or energy community or something else, to allow that to be replicated easily and relatively cheaply, to share the very significant fixed costs that are associated with this. This is one element of, let's call it cross-border for harmonization, that we have to look at. And it's actually the bedrock of the internal market in non-energy areas, and we look at. The other area, which is relevant too, is the issue of cross-border or otherwise trade in energy sharing. Now, for now, it's true that it's essentially restricted to within one bidding zone, which is de facto in almost all situations within a member state, right? That's the way it is now. Of course, there are no provisions that say, well, that's not quite true, but we have, there is provisions on, it is conceivable that you would have a cross-border bidding zone. We've seen similar things in the past. I don't think there are any in place at the moment, but it's conceivable that you could have a complete new organization in the market, but that's not what the world we're in now. The question we have is, what are we using, and what tools should we use best to address local congestion? Now, this is a burning issue across the European Union, right? Absolutely burning, not just in the Netherlands, but in many parts. Now, there's a trade-off here. If we imagine that the renewables production has been put into place anyway, right? So we're talking about a static situation. And then why do we say that one set of market participants get to trade irrespective of local constraints and another set of market participants don't? What justifies that underlying, I'm going to call it discrimination. Note that that might be not the full legal things because they are different, because they're different concepts. But what justifies that distinction between the two, and why does it not constitute unfair discrimination? By contrast, if we know that we're on the way towards an adjustment or a change of bidding zones, it would be the wrong thing to do to start to encourage people to have contracts, arrangements that cross those when you know that you are very shortly going to make it not possible to do it. You would almost be accused of creating legitimate expectations for people. And then the third point is are there ways in which we can use energy sharing, or rather local trading or local arrangements or energy communities to support the alleviation of congestion there? But I think that's something where we can see is various actors here have something that they can offer instead of, they can offer to do things in a certain way. I think these are we can be structured about it, but we shouldn't be overly didactic here, and we should look at each of the benefits that Josh has mentioned about local engagement as being somehow conceptually different from the rest of it, and I think we can get ourselves to good answers here. But I would just caution about either discriminating or giving people legitimate expectations that we won't be able to fulfill in the medium term.
Thank you very much. Very, very clear. Well, I want to say more nothing because we are already a bit late. I would like to thank all of you for participating in this webinar. We will continue to work on this topic because, as Frederick said, in 5 years' time, maybe energy sharing will be common as a phone subscription. So we need to follow it. The report is a mine full of information. So we will explore further. You will see the recording online on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much to everybody. I wish you a good rest of the day and see you soon on these or other channels. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for